Welcome, everyone, to the 9th Mennonites Writing Conference. My name is Ann Hostetler, and I taught in the English department here for 22 years and hung around through COVID so that I could direct this conference. This is the third one that Goshen College has hosted, but in student time those years, 1997 and 2002, were a long time ago. In fact, my first year at Goshen College was the year after the first Mennonites Writing Conference was held here. Goshen is glad to be hosting again in 2022 and hope that current students, as well as the community, can benefit from our gathering and the plenary events we've opened to the public and to live stream. I wish to thank the Planning Committee, with 3 members from Canada and 3 from the United States, Hildy Fraze-Thiessen and Paul Thiessen from Waterloo, Ontario, Rob Zacharias from York University, Julia Spiker-Kasdorf from Penn State, Jeff Gundy from Bluffton, and Daniel Shank-Cruz from New York City. You are great. So I also wish to thank Irvin Beck, Professor Emeritus at Goshen, who organized several of these conferences. Now I know what he did, right? And served on the planning committee for several more. He's been an inspiration and a great role model, and now I have renewed appreciation for all of his hard work. The Mennonites Writing Conferences originated in Canada at the University of Waterloo, Conrad Grebel University College in 1990 through the genius of Hildy Fraze-Thiessen, then a professor of English and Peace Studies and the leading scholar of Mennonite literature. Hildy was responding to the growing prominence of Mennonite writers in Canada who were winning awards and gaining national acclaim. Those of us in the US felt we should join in to make this a transnational conference. Through the years, other versions of this conference have taken place at Bluffton, EMU, the University of Winnipeg, and Fresno Pacific University. One of the purposes of our gathering here this year is to reflect on the 32 years during which Mennonites writing has developed and to look ahead at what the next 32 years might bring. And I hope some of you will be a part of that. Hosting a conference like this is a huge undertaking that takes the devotion of many groups of people. It's kind of like throwing a wedding at which 60 or so people are going to make very long toasts, to which the rest of us are eager to listen. My daughter just got married this summer, so forgive me. You can't have a wedding or a conference without a venue, an event staff, caterers, drivers, assistants, technology support, and the people who pay to attend and give of their time and creativity. And you can't have a literary conference at all if there aren't writers to honor and willing to participate. I wish to thank all of you for coming and the speakers we are about to hear tonight, but also the people behind the scenes. Ashley Hugenboom from ComMar, who came brand new to this job the week before school started and has produced a gorgeous website and poster. Tia Johnson from Events, who has made sure that everything on campus runs smoothly. Sharon Mack, the English department's and many other departments' administrative assistant, who's done everything from printing to reserving hotel spaces with grace. And Joe Kreider, my former student who compiled the bios. I realize 2 of you are missing. I am sorry, we'll fix that. And who has been running a shuttle to South Bend back and forth to bring our speakers here. I offer my deepest thanks to my colleagues in the English department, Jessica Baldanzi and Peter Miller, who have supported the conference through my retirement and 2 COVID postponements. Vice President of Academic Affairs, Anne Venderly, who gave me an office in the interim. And now I am honored to introduce our college president, Rebecca Stoltzfus, who loves poetry and science, to welcome you.
Good evening and welcome to Goshen College. I feel really thrilled to be welcoming you all and to seeing you here on our campus and in this space. What you do is so important in terms of your expressions of yourself, and so many of you are teachers and writing mentors and editors. I have benefited from the teaching and editing of many of you and have had the pleasure of knowing others of you as friends, and I'm delighted to meet new friends this evening. I have had a career in science, and I was thinking about the fact that for 30 years, my main form of writing has been a very structured, stylized, scientific manuscript writing. And one of the things that has happened to me in transitioning from being mostly a scientist to being in this role as president of Goshen College is that I get to write in so many more forms than I used to, being a scientific researcher. One of the really important roles that writing plays for me right now is helping me think better, trying to figure out what is true in the world, but perhaps more importantly, what is true within me. And writing is probably one of the most powerful tools that I know for trying to figure myself and the world out. So I admire all of you so very much. It is thrilling to be in your company. Welcome to Goshen College. We are delighted to have you here. And have a good time.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Baldanzi, and I chair the English department here at Goshen College, and it's really wonderful that this is finally happening. It's wonderful to see you all here. The very first Mennonites Writing Conference I attended was at Bluffton University in 2006, which was also my very first year as a new assistant professor at Goshen College. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea who anyone was, excepting I had heard of Julia Kasdorf. I can say that everyone was super nice and quite brilliant, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I met my very first Mennonite, to my knowledge, in graduate school at Indiana University, Bloomington. I started going to a house church and hymn sings with this fellow English graduate student named Kyle Slabaugh, who some of you might know. He turned out to be a Goshen College grad, which is the start of an unlikely story about how a Jersey Italian ends up welcoming a bunch of Mennonite authors and scholars to Goshen College. Now that I've spent some time putting down roots here at Goshen College, I know quite a bit more than I did at that first Bluffton event. As Anne just said, and I will reiterate because it's exciting, Goshen College has hosted this conference twice before, first in 1997, then in 2002. And it's exciting to be given a third go at this despite COVID's attempts to thwart us. Many former chairs of the English department here at Goshen College have been putting their retirement to impressively productive use in honoring and celebrating the 32 years of the conference since its start in 1990, especially Anne Hostetler, who you will hear even more from shortly, and Irvin Beck. In addition to organizing this conference, while my colleagues and I are in the midst of a busy semester, Anne and Irvin have worked tirelessly to keep the content we're all writing, discussing, and sharing healthy by starting and running the Journal of Mennonite Writing. The English department at Goshen College has been nurturing Mennonite writers for many years, especially through its unique publishing opportunities, which began with Nick Lindsay's Pinch Penny Press chapbooks. Pinch Penny Press, in fact, has reached its 50-year anniversary, which you can help celebrate on Saturday evening at 9 p.m. in Newcomer Center in a reading and open mic organized by some of our Goshen College students. So if anybody here has ever published a Pinch Penny Press book or a broadside, please come read it. And if you can't find it, we can help you try to find it before then. Most writing students here at Goshen College publish something by the time they graduate, and this is thanks to The Record, our campus newspaper run by the Communications Department and Dwayne Stolzfus, as well as the English Department's one-page broadside publications. Julia Kasdorf, Jeff Gundy, Sophia Samatar, Barbara Nickel, David Waltner-Tays, and even filmmaker Jim Strauss have all published broadsides at some point. If you have time to pass through the English department here on campus, now located on the first floor of Wise Hall, you can see a Sophia Samatar broadside hanging next to a broadside by Seamus Haney. You can also see a Julia Kasdorf broadside sharing a wall with broadsides by Gwendolyn Brooks and David Foster Wallace. One of the most impressive things about this conference as it develops and changes to fit the times is the range of texts being studied. Not just fiction, poetry, and memoir, but also speculative fiction, comics and graphic novels, my research area, podcasting, and film. I can't wait to see who else's work from Goshen College and from this conference we will proudly hang on our department wall and celebrate in years to come, as well as what work we find other ways to celebrate and display because it can't be contained within a frame. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome and enjoy.
And now to introduce tonight's speaker, and I will introduce Casey, she will read, and then I will introduce our second set of speakers when their turn comes. So there's a lot of talking at the beginning of these things. So I'll keep this short and sweet. I first met Casey Plett at the Mennonites Writing Conference at Fresno Pacific University in California in 2015, where she had come to present at our first ever LGBTQ literature panel. I was so curious that someone whose transgender status had been marginalized by the church was so interested in, even passionate about participating in a Mennonites writing conference. I didn't get to hear her talk because of concurrent commitments, but I did speak with her in person and was impressed with how gracious she is and how incredibly brave. When I went home and read her books, I was astonished all over again. Casey is a writer on the growing edge of literary and social consciousness who is also intentional about connecting with the body of Mennonite writers past and present. She points us forward while redeeming past some of us have dismissed as too narrow by enabling us to see it anew. That's what she does in her novel, Little Fish, but I can't give you an example because it would have to come with a spoiler alert, and I want you to discover it for yourself. Her bio on the web lists her many accomplishments and awards, and I encourage you to read it. Tonight, let her open a space of possibility for you, the place between past and future where we can dream and reframe our visions of what can be. The field out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing that Rumi describes. It's the field in which we can meet each other as we truly are. It's the field of literature, a field in which we as readers and writers can find words for each other and the world unfolding around us. Casey, welcome.
Thank you for that really lovely introduction, and hello all of you. Can you hear me all okay? Okay, amazing. It is so good to be with you all. It is so good to be with you all here. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak. And I would just want to say at the outset, I do understand the significance of me being invited here as a keynote speaker. I know that the identities that I carry by being here can sometimes be thought of as a contradiction in terms that I embody some things that you might not think go together. Like, my father's family is Mennonite Brethren, my father's family is EMC, Kleinisch Gemeinde, my stepdad's family is General Folk Conference, so that's a joke. Okay, seriously, it is so good to be in this room. I know many of us have likely made difficult choices to be here, and in some cases to not be here. Hello if you're watching on the live stream, wherever the live stream is. I find it meaningful to be here in this room. Acts of literary practice and study are by their nature so solitary, and I wonder particularly sometimes about the particular solitude of us as Mennonite writers. that I think it is meaningful for us to gather, and I'm glad we are doing so, even if we had to wait a couple years. As was said in the introduction, I am a transgender woman. And honestly, in terms of engaging with my Mennoniteness, I have sort of come to the conclusion that I don't find being a trans Mennonite that cosmically remarkable. Socially, certainly there are complications, and there are those who might take issue with that, and that is difficult for me in the way it is for, I think, all people for whom queerness and Mennoniteness intertwine. But cosmically and spiritually, I'm not sure it's. I've sort of ended up wondering if it's really that remarkable to actually bring scripture into it. Matthew chapter 19, verse 12, for those who are eunuchs, who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. I am interested in where transness and Mennoniteness intersect, yes, but I'm less interested in these days of the remarkability of that existence, in the same way that I wonder about the value of trying to pin down what makes someone a Mennonite. I know we wrestle with that sometimes in our worlds, and that question has been wrestled off sometimes at these conferences. My experience with transness and queerness has sort of taught me, for those, that that question can sometimes be a trap. And so I want to share with you maybe the possibility, if you want to call yourself a Mennonite, you can. If you don't, you don't. If you want to call yourself a Mennonite and only in certain settings, communities, definitions for yourself, that is fine. I still want to work with identity. I think identity is important. But trying to create some kind of working universal definition of that identity, or even worse, fretting for yourself whether you live up to it. My experience, again, as a queer person has taught me that there's kind of no end to that. It can kind of be a trap. And so I've settled it for myself about who I am. I believe in giving myself that agency. And I'm talking at length about all this because I believe that all of us here deserve that same agency when it comes to the question of how one engages with Mennoniteness as literary people, whatever that means to you, whatever might have brought you here today for this weekend. I think often about agency, and I think about agency and our narratives. The narratives that we are drawn to and the narratives that we choose. I think of the narratives that we choose to pass on, the ones we choose to not. I think of the narratives that we are drawn to, that we desire, and I think of the narratives that we don't necessarily want to look at. My father, one of the Mennonite brethren, he went to a public high school in Edmonton, Alberta in the 1970s, and he got cast in a production of Godspell. And he got this part that this other guy, it was like this big public high school, he got this part that this other guy really wanted. This guy, he was an aspirational actor, he had formal training and experience, he had dreams of being a professional. But my dad, having grown up in the church, actually knew something about the religious material. Can everyone still hear me okay? Everyone still? Okay, great. So my dad gets this big role, and this other guy, right, he's jealous, he just never gets over it. And so after the show happens, the show closes. The show went well. At the cast party, this guy, he comes up to my dad and he starts talking about, how he's a better actor, how he could have played this part much better than him, how my dad never could have got the part, blah, blah, blah. And he works himself up into this rage. And eventually he hits my dad in the face. To which my dad simply says, "If your enemy strikes you on your right cheek, offer him your left." And this other guy, he just put down his hands and started crying. That's the story my dad told me. He is also the person who taught me that old saying, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. More seriously, thinking about that today as an adult, I can reflect on the fact that my father, that would have been, I think it's safe to say, maybe not super typical behavior. My father was someone who grew up in a violent household and a violent world, and I knew that from my childhood as well. He is someone who, as a rule, I don't think would generally respond to a strike on the face with turning the other cheek. And I think he'd freely admit that too. Dad, if you're watching on the live stream, we can argue about this later. My father has plenty of stories that involve anger and rage and violence, but he had this narrative that he wanted to impress on me when I was younger. He wanted to break a cycle of violence when I came along, and he did it, and that story about Godspell was part of it. I don't know if that actually all happened the way he described it. I generally don't know if that even happened at all. Maybe it did. Maybe it did in a certain version of it. For these purposes, it didn't really matter. He had a narrative, and he wanted that narrative to make an impression on me with it, and it worked. Which isn't terribly different from writing fiction, really. The author Hilary Mantel, who sadly died last week, she has an applicable quote about this. She says, "Information is not knowledge, and history is not the past. It is the method we have evolved of organizing our ignorance of the past. It's the record of what's left on the record. It is no more the past than a birth certificate is a birth, or a script is a performance, or a map is a journey. It's no more than the best we can do, and often it falls short of that." It's the record of what's left on the record. That's part of what we do here, I think, maybe as literary people. We make part of the record of what is left on the record. It is more than the best we can do. It's no more than the best we can do, sorry. And often it falls short of that. Part of it being the best we can do, I believe, is to ask ourselves which narratives we're drawn to and which narratives we don't want to look at. I'll tell you another story. Everyone can still hear me? Okay, amazing. So some years ago, my friend Stephen, he was working as a care aide for adults in group living in Iowa City. And one of the things he did there was he accompanied clients outside the group facility to go to places in town just to like shop or hang out or whatever. And so what they'd often do is they'd often go to thrift stores. So one day, where did they go in? Any guesses? Any at all? When my friend was telling me this, he was like, "I forgot the name of the store. I'm pretty sure it was." And I was like, "It's called the MCC. Yeah, don't worry about it." Anyway, so they go in, and his client starts freaking out, which was not uncommon. This man often had difficulty in certain unpredictable situations. And so he just starts screaming in the middle of this store, shrieking at the top of his lungs. And Stephen told me, like, again, it wasn't uncommon for this client of his. Usually when it happened in public, invariably, they were asked to leave. But in this case, what happened was the old woman minding the store did not ask them to leave. Instead, she sidled up to my friend Stephen and just nodded at his client, who again was still shrieking at the top of his lungs, did not ask them to leave, and she just said, "He's upset." And I'll tell you one more story. So in my mid-20s, I worked at a cafe in Winnipeg. And one day, one of the regulars, there was this old handyman who I think was originally from the western part of the province. He found out that I was of Mennonite extraction. And he told me what he said that people knew where he was from. He said that when a Mennonite man ran into trouble with the law, particularly, say, in domestic matters, say if he was known to be violent with his wife, that when the police attempted to intervene, the elders would say, "We'll handle it in the church." And the police let them. So the old handyman who was my customer told me, when Mr. Penner and Mr. Friesen got into a scrape, they'd handle it in the church. And the police left them alone. This is in a province where 3/4 of the prison population are Indigenous. So I've now told you 3 stories that relate to Mennoniteness from 3 different people, all of which actually I have no way of knowing for sure their veracity in the way we think about veracity. I have no way of knowing to what degree they are exaggerated or untruthful in some way, or if I too have messed something up in my recollections and retellings. All of these stories are years old from when I first heard them. I certainly have never told all those stories together until right now. Sometimes there are narratives I want everybody else to know. Sometimes there are narratives that I do not want to look at. And often, as both a storyteller and a person making sense of the world where time is always ticking away, I have to choose one narrative at the expense of another. I've already done that actually here in this talk. I mean, I chose to tell you 3 stories that I have heard in the service of making the point that we have a choice in the narratives that we follow, we pass on, and as a fiction writer, create. I chose to tell you those stories for complicated reasons, but I chose them, and I don't have unlimited time. I'll move on here by maybe leaving you with these questions. What are the narratives that you are drawn to? What are the narratives that you keep coming back to? And what are the narratives that you don't want to look at? I think it behooves us as writers and literary people to always be asking those questions. Sometimes those answers can also overlap, and that can be a grim thing indeed, but no less important, probably. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about my own work, and I'm also going to read from it. I'm going to keep talking about narrative, but I also want to talk a little bit about community. So in my own work, when Mennonite characters appear, those Mennonites are usually alone. They are often distant or separated from other Mennonites. What interaction they do have is usually one-on-one and often fleeting or charged or contains some anguish. In Little Fish, a novel I wrote, the main character is a trans woman named Wendy Reimer who has little relationship with her family except her father, who's left the church and doesn't really like to talk about Mennonite things. She discovers that her grandfather, who has long since passed, might also have been trans like her, thanks to an old family friend named Anna who tells her this. And Wendy tries to talk with Anna more, but she is shifty and secretive, even as she is willing to chat with Wendy. Towards the end of the book, Wendy is able to come to any factual conclusions about her grandfather. She can't, it's just not possible. His existence was wrapped in too much secrecy and quietness. But even after all she experiences and learns and all she doesn't learn, the bits and pieces and traces she comes across does reshape the possibility she has for him, does reshape the narrative of what she's able to have about him. And despite that absence of facts, despite the meagerness of what Hilary Mantel terms of the record, of what's left on the record, still, this leads Wendy to a great degree of inner strength and genuine spiritual power, even as the circumstances of her life grow darker. Because she chooses to believe a narrative about her grandfather that others do not. And that matters to Wendy, that really matters. The last part of Miriam Taves' A Complicated Kindness is one of my favorite sections of that book and her oeuvre. I'm going to read this from the second last page. I'm going to read a little part of it here. Had my dad really gone to pick garbage off mountains, or was he also at the bottom of the rat? No, I preferred the first story, the one about sacrifice and pain, because it presented opportunities of being reunited, of being happy again, somewhere in the real world, our family, and because it was about everlasting love, and that's what I like to believe in. The stories that I have told myself are bleeding into a dream, finally, that is slowly coming true. I've learned from living in this town that stories are what matter, and that if we can believe them, I mean really believe them, we have a chance at redemption. Those words come from Nomi, the teenage protagonist, even though she is no longer a believer. And that actually gives the passage some more power to me. She professes no faith, and yet she still has some. She is presented with a lot of possible narratives in the book that are all really bad and really bleak, and few of which make any sense. But she chooses a narrative among imperfect options, and she sticks with it. And that powers her through a dark road. Choosing a narrative among imperfect options. In my latest book, A Dream of a Woman, which I don't have up here, this stuff comes up too, but in a bit of a different way. The main story that involves Mennonite things is a short story called Enough Trouble. And in that story, Gemma returns to her small Mennonite hometown on the prairies, and she shacks up with these 2 other girls, Ava and Olive, who have wound up there, who are both from the city and have no relation to Mennoniteness. Gemma is deeply in trouble with alcohol. She is broke, her body is starting to fail her, and her material existence is on a downward trajectory on many levels. Personally, I think of her kind of as a spiritual successor to Wendy in Little Fish in many ways. But at one point, Gemma becomes animated by thoughts of her family at one point. She's drunk during a dinner that she cooked. She made them Varaniches. And suddenly she speaks in slower, more measured tones. I'm going to read from that section now. In this section, they're at dinner, and Olive, one of the other girls, Gemma has just related how her father had to leave his church after university. "Why did that happen?" asks Olive. Gemma gazes at her. This might be the first time she has witnessed Olive be interested in something. Gemma does not enjoy the sensation of being interesting, but she will go with it. She said, he told his minister he did not understand why the fact that someone did not believe in Jesus Christ meant that they should go to hell, and the minister did not have an answer. Gotcha. "So when I came along, we went to this church that met in houses," Gemma continues. "Any member with a living room big enough to fit, they'd host, which was not my dad and I. Certainly, I've been to traditional churches lots, but out here we went to houses." Oh, previously, she had made a joke about saying, "You're trying to ask if I was raised with bonnets and buggies, and I was not." So then Olive says, "Did your dad grow up with bonnets and buggies?" "No, he was Steinbach in the 70s. He grew up with hymn sing." "What?" "Never mind." It's nice to read that part in a place that'll get the joke. That hasn't happened before. Never mind. But it's, it's never that simple that, even once I went out to the Hutterites, we went out there for a meal once, and the family dining room was the sparest big room I ever saw, but still they tooled me around their colony in a four-wheeler. There was this old woman, and she whipped me around in one, and I was terrified, but she was having so much fun. That would be to the west of here. Gemma gestures with her head to the window. In the valley where you start to have hills. "That's funny," said Olive. At first, Gemma does not respond. A world has begun to form in Gemma's third eye as she began talking about this. Then she says, "Funny, I suppose. All of those people where they truly went wrong was in wishing to remove themselves from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever." It seems charming in its own way, doesn't it? They wanted just to be left alone, but on the scale of an entire life or an entire community, that is a childish desire, not to mention an impossible one. What do you mean? Olive is very focused on Gemma now. Gemma puts down her cutlery. It has been a long time since she has heard her grandparents speak, but there is little of their sonority she does not remember. She says, "The temptation to remove oneself from the world does not lack for appeal. The idea does not need a scriptural mandate to accrue power. Anybody who does not feel accepted within the world, which is most people, regardless of whether it's actually true, can be excited by this desire." She drains her glass. She says, "The idea of forming a little pocket universe where everyone already believes the truths you hold, where you can build a family according to those truths, and where you make a promise to yourself, and everybody else in that universe that you're going to do right by them, and all the cruelty of the world, the ugliness, the bullheadedness, you and a few other people could just band together and make a bulwark against these things, couldn't you? Put it that way, it sounds beautiful, no?" Olive says calmly, "I see where you're going with this." She interrupts her, "Who would want to leave? But the promise never, ever works that way. I still believe in God." In her peripheral vision, Gemma sees Ava turn her face, stunned, to face her. "Whether I want to or not. But isolation, walling off from the world with no expiration date, that I won't believe in. Isolation corrodes. It makes your mind do bad things. It narrows your trust to a tiny circle, and then it narrows it a little more. Removing yourself from the world anyway isn't actually an option," Gemma says. "My ancestors on my father's side believed they were running off to the middle of nowhere to live peaceably. They wanted less possessions, less worldliness. They thought everyone was getting too extravagant back in Russia. They were also the first settlers here after Treaty 1. There's no such thing as opting out of your life's worldly consequences. Thinking otherwise is just fooling yourself." Ending the part of the book that I'm reading. So this character Gemma, her read on her upbringing is not really one of opposing religion, but isolation. As a transgender woman who has experienced homophobia and transphobia, she has, as you can imagine, some grudges with her small town and the Mennonite church. But if you listen to her grudges, they're not really about God. They're about the idea of opting out. And so is Wendy, I think, in Little Fish. They both, too, are conflicted in what they consider their responsibilities to the larger world, which they have a hard time being a part of. I mean, you know, Mennonitism aside, they are queer transsexual women. They are apart for much. Typo. They are sort of separated from society in certain ways, whether they want to be or not, which is also a common vexation in Mennonite literature. I mean, all the way back to Tom Ween's And Peace Shall Destroy Many, right? And is also a point that Daniel Schenck Cruz draws in Query Mennonite literature, that queerness and Mennonitism have surprising things in common sometimes. But also in keeping with their difficulties, to make things a little more complicated. And despite their anger against separatism, Wendy and Gemma also both express strong personal wishes to withdraw from the world themselves, and they also express some personal deep fondness for elderly relatives who did the same. Everybody's depression and mental illness and substance abuse, too, is all tangled up with this. This summer, I was visiting my mom, and she said something interesting that has still stayed with me. She said she had read this article where there was some celebrity who had made the comment, everybody just wants to be seen. And she told me, she said, you know, I read that and I thought, that isn't true for Mennonites, is it? Like, we specifically don't want to be seen. That reverberated with me. And it made me think, too, of this. The book that I'd written was already published by this point. I don't think Gemma, in my story that I just read a part of, I don't think she wants to be seen either. She even alludes to that at one point. The quote is, she does not enjoy the sensation of being interesting. I think she wants to be happy. She doesn't want to be alone. But she doesn't want to be seen for who she is, not to those she's close to or the world at large. That's just not something that's important to her. She still wants, in her own way, to be the quiet in the land, and sometimes this is a form of strength, of a Mennonite stoicism, perhaps familiar to some of us, that can lead to resilience among hardship, and sometimes it is a form of suffering, of opting out as well. This is a conjecture I'm about to make. This is not a firm opinion. It is sort of a wondering that I would like to sort of posit. I wonder if as writers or literary people and Mennonites, that we are particularly comfortable with the idea of being observers, that we are somewhat good at that. Again, I'm speaking a little more from my personal experience here and sort of spitballing. But I think some of us by our nature are not terribly comfortable being seen. And I think it can be good sometimes to not want to be seen. But if I can bring it back to agency, I would also say that does not mean we are not powerless. I would say we do have agency. And I wonder sometimes that particularly because Mennonite literature is so filled with sort of individual rogues, rebels, liars, rascals, that sometimes there is a temptation to wonder if we have less agency, or to treat both the larger Mennonite worlds and the world in general as some sort of immovable thing. And yet, we are also part of our own subdivision of, a Mennonite community that we are literally making happen right now, that you are literally part of through this gathering because you have come here and you have put your body in the seat that you are sitting in right now. Magdalene Redekop said in her latest book that identity is something that we create while interacting with others. Accordingly, this weekend I am excited to both participate in and witness what we create with each other, and I am excited to be here with all of you. Community is sometimes the most complicated thing, isn't it? It is forever a double-edged sword. Sophia Samatar has a section in her short story, Fallow, where the main character, Agar, gives a presentation to a group of futuristic Mennonites on sordid parts of their history. And it does not go well. There's a quote that I think of all the time. "This episode in our history was a wound. The cells of the body sprang into action when it was touched, closing about it, closing it down." And another quote earlier in the story. I understood then that she had a horror of the exercise of power, not only the obvious sorts of power, the rod, the shout, but the type we knew most intimately, the power of the group. She had a horror of the downcast eye that waits for others to act. The story is talking about a teacher here, a very kind teacher who dies by suicide later in the story, whose classroom starts to grow rowdy and form against her, and the teacher's instinct is to know that the group will always win against her, and it is not going to be a good thing. The group, too, of course, being a kind of community. Ever since I read Miriam Taves's Women Talking, I have been mesmerized and haunted by its narrator, August Epp, who is so unlike every other fictional protagonist that we have read from that author. August definitely does not want to be seen. He is suicidal and homeless, and he leaves England for his tiny former home of Malachna Colony, even though he is, to put it mildly, disliked there, simply because, and he goes back simply because that is, quote, where life had made sense. Where life had made sense, that is enough to cause him to return, where life had made sense. Unlike a lot of other, again, Miriam Taves protagonists, sometimes I get the sense that August wants to completely disappear. He is undoubtedly under threat from the other men in the colony, and when the climax of the novel nears, August has intense choices to make, and none of them are very appealing. I find him also perhaps like Tom Weems in Peace Shall Destroy Many in that way. But where he is unlike the character of Tom, which always sort of sticks with me, is that August exercises the agency to make a choice. There is a swerve at the end of the book that is so intense and so moving, where August all of a sudden, I am going to spoil this, I am so sorry if you haven't read it, my apologies, this is just going to happen. There is a swerve at the end of the book where August decides that he will live and that he is not going to kill himself, and he will stay in Malachna where he chooses to believe that Peters, who is the cruel authoritarian bishop, that he has capacity, however small, for making peace, and he will do that anyway despite the violence he might risk by being there. And that swerve is so core-shaking and chilling to me. I still think always of these lines that comes at in some of the very last couple pages. The women in the loft have taught me that consciousness is resistance, that faith is action, that time is running out. But can faith also be to return, to stay, to serve? And that also to me calls to mind another line from Fallow, with which I think Women Talking actually shares some interesting emotional tenors. At the end of Fallow, Agar's sister leaves their world, saying that those who are not part of the innocents have three choices: to fade, fester, or run. Agar amends this toward the end, saying, for some of there are only three choices, but others have a fourth choice: to endure. Agar and August are different characters. There are fundamental, I think, differences with how I read those stories. I also think one of the things that us as readers, we get to consider and discuss and divine for ourselves the meanings and implications of these characters' choices. Whether consciously or not, we will choose a narrative to take from them. Where life had made sense. Where has your life made sense? Where has mine? If I can relate these stories in a roundabout way to this conference, what narratives will we discuss this weekend that perhaps have a through line in 32 years of these gatherings? And what are narratives that might be chosen or examined for the first time? I look forward to hearing from you this weekend about them and thinking about these things. One other thing I will tell you about my experience as a transgender woman, particularly my experience in a specific corner of a trans literary community. I have been intensely involved with some people in a little mini community of it for years, doing lots of very intense labor within it, and has just taught me over and over that we have agency in this work that we do, and also that our community making is not random or happenstance, and that though it is a double-edged sword, and I think Mennonite literature, of course, has limitless examples of the way that community can stultify and kill. Reflecting on communities' failures does not mean giving up on it. And one of the reasons I love coming to these things is I think we have opportunities to nurture a healthy, incisive, meaningful community. I do. To wrap up here, you know, I know because I'm young, because I'm trans, because my work has been on the scene for not more than a decade, I have seen some people talk about my work as part of a new force in Mennonite writing, and I'm very grateful for that. I am very honored to be here. But I also mostly feel honored to be part of a group of Mennonite writers who are making new and beautiful, exciting work. People like Sophia, like Daniel, like Andrew Unger, are all here today. Actually, I think Andrew's not here today. Anyway, Sherry Clausen, Jonathan Dick, Stephen Beachy, Sarah Enns. I find it so exciting also to be part of a tradition of Mennonite writers and to be attending these things, sometimes with people that I grew up reading. But also mostly listen to me, I'm also just already excited about whatever is coming next. If you are here and you are not published yet, or if you're worried about not having published yet, or if you are watching this in a recording far after this event takes place, and if you're just wondering whether to work at all, please know I am excited to hear what you have to say. I am excited to be here. I am excited to see and hear your work, and I hope you complete your work. I will actually wrap up with some of the last words we hear from Ray Nichol, the father in A Complicated Kindness, who in his parting letter to his daughter, Nomi, reads, "I'll give you a year or 2 or 5 to develop your system. In the meantime, we have work to do." August Epp says that too before the women leave the hayloft. Now there is work to do. But Ray Nichol actually also then completely ends his letter with this. "Remember the affirmative words of Jesus, Nomi. Lo, I am with you always." Blessings to you all. Thank you.